May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Nguyện tất cả chúng sinh có được hạnh phúc và nhân của hạnh phúc. Nguyện tất cả chúng sinh thoát khỏi khổ đau và nhân của khổ đau. Nguyện tất cả chúng sinh không xa lìa an lạc mà thoát khỏi khổ đau. Nguyện tất cả chúng sinh an trụ trong tâm bình đẳng, không bám luyến bằng hữu, không sân hận kẻ thù. Xem trên tăng chế để hoa tăng để quay chú tăng đến ba chú trì. Xem trên tăng chế đưa eo tăng đưa eo trì chú tăng đưa hoa chú trì. Xem trên tăng chế đưa eo mê bênh để hoa tăng mê đưa hoa chú trì. Xem trên tăng chế đưa cha tăng ni tăng đưa quay. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Mặt đất này được trang nghiêm với dầu thơm và trải đầy hoa. Tô điểm với núi Tu Di, tứ đại bộ châu, mặt trời và mặt trăng. Con tưởng tượng nơi đây là cõi Phật và xin cúng dường. Nguyện tất cả chúng sinh được an hưởng cõi tịnh độ này. Sa di vô kỳ trước sinh mê tô trong re rap lên dưới đi gan ba đi. Sang sinh du mi lê hoa yi gồm cung nam đa sinh lan chô ban sô yi đam guru ratnam mandala kham nirya taya mi.
Nghe cha chút là thà sợ rồi. Nhưng mà giờ đó chúng tôi nghĩ là sốt xong. Tôi nghe đi cha chút đó. Lẽ đó nhớ một bề sáng hóa trên này, không buồn đổ lên xe của bà thì là răng mẹ bà chứ. Lẽ đó nhớ một bề hoàng thì không buồn đổ lên. Cho là sĩ số số mẹ tí là khoa sĩ vào đó. Khoa sĩ thì rõ rệt rùi khoa tế vào đó. Và tí là tôi nghe cha chút xem bữa nay, tôi nghe cha chút xem bữa nay, cha chút thì bế trả rồi. Tôi nghe cha chút thì là thả sẽ ra. Thả mẹ bà ra, nghe mà nè, tôi nghe nhá thì yong rồi thong mà nè. Tàn đá tôi sẽ nè, cô thả mẹ bà nhong rồi. Tàn bế dù chén nè thả rồi. Khoa là thong mà mẹ cha thả mà hiểu sẽ ra. Tàn ngà ra dù nè, cái mà cha tôi sẽ nè, thả mà mẹ ghé số ra sẽ ra. Cả chế nè, tè khó rồi sẽ. Ý đó chân tôi nghĩ là ya mà lẽ sẽ cái đề rồi. Tôi nghe cha chút thì là thả. Nằm bà con tôi yêu mình á sẽ. Bế dù mà chế nè, thả mẹ bà sẽ ra. Bế dù chế nè, khoa là thong mà mẹ cha thả mà thong để bà sẽ ra. Khoa thả yêu sống rồi ra, bế dù chế nè. Bế dù mẹ chế cái chế nè, thả mẹ bà sẽ ra ra. Chế cho ngà ra dù số samul ta nè. Nhưng mà ta mẹ kì bà sẽ chỉ xa để tình samul ta nè. Thả mẹ bà sẽ ra, ta đã tu stay thế ra, mà tôi ya thả đề kì. Samul khổ kìa mà ra. Sẽ tôi nghe cha xuống thì là thả nằm bà con tôi yêu mình á. Thả cha nhiều mà ra, ta đã tôi nghe nhang chế đề ổ ra, thong mà mẹ bà nhang đề ra. Ta ta rin ta khoe nà nè tra bà sẽ mình lệ sĩ kìa chế ya bù stay ra mà tôi. Sẽ có ra kèm đuổi ra, mà tôi ta bà sẽ mình chế đề yêu mà ra. Tôi nghe cha xuống thì là thả. Thì mẹ bà sẽ chế nè. Tôi nghe cha xuống thì là thả. Nằm bà con tôi yêu mình á. Đi lệ thả thế nè, nằm bà con tôi. Yêu bà mà rê sổ ra, tàn đã ngà ra sổ. Lẽ ta nhớ một bê sáng hoa được chút nè. Lenyu Yishawando Kyone Lesa Chiteva Tisitu Tameverwa. Tunga Jason de la Ta Namba Kundu Yemenas. Samlutana Munerwa. Mahambana Kaza Kaza Bada Takushi. Tunga Nyatera. Namba Kundu Yemena. Chichu Dini Chimbalas. Chiba Sangarazu Chiba the Mara, Chiba Stipu Chunjul Sigara. Samlutang, Samlutsera de Malungetalia. Chiba Spu Chunjul Sigara. Kina Sangarazo, Mone Samlutana. Puchunju Neshi Samlu. Tang me tunga samlu tseshi ngone le megere te le jara chi kyu sipa susu kyo kyo sigara ngarazu sungara chi kyu dini chimbalas sipa susu kyo sigara susu 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 tunge nyoya tando susu le sane dewa dewi warde tunge kyu di sade warde dewa yoya tabshi yin samgi warde tunge yoya kyu sade yora oti indiko sosu kyo se sosu sosu tuli chargi armado shenda jiten chiba bondo se mi shenda se tuku tan chiba kwa korchu tinda chinga chiba mari sungora sosu kyo se de sikyu chiba sosu kyo se ramanza chiba da mari ta ina puna shiri se samlo tanto umendo sungora sikyu dini chingbalas koe gyazu dili awa chingne dedewa dili sora gyazu chukin tina chudeo de sigora jingsi ma tilma chö talma nosuna chö nal jingsigra 동에 계속 들었다 넘버 컨디면은 지키 니니 싱발라 지바체네 케메 교스 오늘 삼루타데 지네 소소 지바체 공거지 줘라 마마바 요에도 삼루타는 니말레 카르카르 사이치 다 마마바나 야와이다 텐도 카와카와 키도이치 타 메버리치데 삼나 세밀야 소알레그르바 소아케 부슈심블레그라 그라주 삼루스타기 오마라 두스탱게치 타고리스 두스탱게 베소레스 소아젠도 대두게 하고 요마라 엄마도 삼루타나 지버게 공개를 치르되 지버 가르쳐 지고 말해서 다리에 탑시 가르쳐 지고 말해서 소개하라 야 뒤질라나 맞아 이렇게
So here, to begin with, as the Master Aryadeva, Pakpala Aryadeva has said, so since there is no limit at all to this ocean of suffering, so here, when we think about this kind of ocean of suffering, the 6 types of beings within samsara, we take up these various aggregates due to the force of our karma and afflictions and cast them off. We continue to cycle, going through these various types of beings. And this kind of ocean, as it's explained, this ocean of suffering, we have since beginningless time. There's no beginning to this process. We have continued to create karma and take rebirth, be propelled under the control of that karma, to continue to take rebirth. And so there's no beginning to this process. And it said that there is, but there can be an end. If we don't sort of make any effort, then we won't come to an end of samsara. If we continue in the same way that we are acting, we will continue to create karma, create the causes for continuing to cycle, to cast off one set of aggregates and take up another, and so forth. And so we need to sort of think for ourselves that we have to continue. There is no end so long as we don't make an effort. So here, if we really begin to think about this, like we can contemplate that we have been taking rebirth since beginningless time due to the force of our karma. And we are going to continue to have to, as long as we continue in the same pattern, to take this rebirth, this cycle of rebirth endlessly. And so it continues saying, you child, and here it's not referring to our age, but rather our level of thinking. We are sort of childlike, ordinary beings. And here we're called ordinary beings because we create our own suffering. So those of us, we think that we are creating the causes for happiness. We want happiness, but in turn, we are creating the causes for our suffering. So we continue to suffer due to ourselves creating those those causes. Our own individual sufferings are from our own individual causes. So here, this is really emphasizing that there is no creator. When we use this term ordinary beings, in English it might not capture that, but really there is no creator that is giving us suffering or sending us into particular rebirths, but rather this situation of this ocean of samsaric suffering, this bondage as it continues. So it says, the verse, "You child, why do you not give rise to fear of this bondage?" So here, we are sort of stuck in this situation. So long as we don't make any effort to get ourselves out, we really are looking at a limitless ocean of suffering. And why don't we feel afraid of this? Looking at this kind of situation, the limitless rebirths that we have taken previously, and the limitless rebirths that we will continue to take, suffering all kinds of different sufferings. If we really think about this and contemplate it in relation to ourselves, we would have fear. But most of the time, we have this kind of thought that we're permanent, that we're going to remain forever, we're stable somehow. And so we don't really consider the situation that we are in. But if we were to reflect on it in some depth, we would have a feeling about wanting to get out of this situation of suffering. So as this, to say the whole verse by Aryadeva, this ocean of suffering has no limit, really. And so you, child, why do you not give rise to fear at this bondage? Seeing that kind of situation, if we really are to contemplate it, this will make us be afraid and make us begin to make effort to get out of that kind of situation.
Nên chúng ta suy nghĩ như một đứa trẻ thơ, cho nên chúng ta bị chìm đắm trong biển khổ. Nhưng tại sao không sợ hãi cái biển khổ rất là khó thoát như vậy? Vì cái biển nó sẽ không có giới hạn trong số loài chúng sinh. Nên tại sao mình không có sợ hãi cái nỗi khổ đau trong cái biển khổ sinh tử luân hồi? Mình đang bị rớt xuống và chìm đắm trong cái biển khổ, nó không bao giờ cùng tận, nó không có giới hạn. Mà tại sao các ngươi không có
Ki samta chema yoya de pet ta mene namshi koran kyun du tuche de ura samsang yaga tu so su le sangye wa che sante ta rumbu samta na ma la kya la kada kande che te yo rumbu shwe che da ya la te shu chim ma bu te sa ra to nya to nge nyo jikten gi phusum so bana ne de ma nyu cha me che ra kya sa mu pe hai wang bu kya shin de sang ba da te le che chang ke ya ma 두가 녀와에 더 전도를 소부터데 제발을 자각해요 말아. 네 야가 삼루다나 아니 심지어 강가던 저와요 버다 파다 마셔를 즉 삼루 과도와. 네 타메버 삼루다면나 동행ኛ의 삼루다나 어머니 지 탑시를 지어나 제고를 삼부도와. sendijanjana ani shushida kwayo mar nambachana sendijanjana tagu timyorani chi yarab sindese kumakui chakwa te kangade che chogmaro mado mese ko ke karsine ke dora kimado samlishira da ko kemedo kimaro ko sendile yabu yongo yore kime penjele yabu yongo yora kime penjele yabu yore sendile sose lechene sambuchesona sendile soso tengyo soso kibayo nami kibayo samalya 처음에 전부터 저 권에 내통비라 시라 전부 맞추네 시라 처음 맞추네 때로시네 되도 어디인데 삼루 개침부터 오라 말아서 책이 간간 따드나니 시라 티시오 말 시기매게 삼루 땅이라네 가리네 제셔라 진디던 다시 부터 개침 부시우시네 어디 말해서 그러지 치마대 야 삼루다 땅말이야 삼루다 소소 딱 봐도 말해 치료가 하나씩 미다 버려 되고 미다 버이나 균디 뒤진 로여라 균디 뒤지만 로여라 어디선가 어떤데 삼루다나 느껴지마 가라서 용기지 삼루다는 내성 비통을 깨지고 삼루다는 즉시 잡아요 것도 기부청을이지나 늘어지는 코에 동을 즉시 잡아요 것도 기부청부러지나 소소치고 말에 따다 집에 심제 탐지 동해지 나와라 메시베니지께네 아니 산제 고반 탐지 삼루기도 어디인데 삼부 자체부 유림부 삼루다 수수지 톱절이지나 요번지 톱지 남산 시부지 차그랬으면 된데 소해요 말아 대타 예메루제라 남사지 용에 유배선을 지어 말 용에도 그래 수수 셈블 규슈탄에 야르도도 다테 수수 소야르마도 남사지 톱자고 저 수리 때문에 시소야지 말아 오야 티치손 마음도 맞다 아니 되게 싫어시
So, therefore, as Buddhists, our thinking really needs to be sort of vast, expansive, in the sense that, again, we are impermanent in the sense of being momentary, not remaining for even a moment. And when we look at the sort of continuity of our consciousness, this is something where we have taken countless rebirths in the past. And again, if we look at the future, we are going to continue to move into future rebirths. And so if we think about this, if we actually contemplate, we can see that we have experienced all kinds of sufferings throughout samsara, all of the various sufferings. We have been born as hell beings countless times. And we have also experienced the sort of most excellent enjoyments of samsara. We have been, high wheel turning monarchs and so forth. We have been the highest of the gods. And yet we continue to sort of cycle throughout samsara. So we can reflect in this way on our countless rebirths and the kind of experiences that we have had. But the best sort of way is to think about the fact that because we have had these countless rebirths, we have had all relationships with all of these beings. So we can then begin to contemplate the great kindness that they have shown us and so forth. If we're only thinking about this life, then we really it's a very limited kind of a view. We might avoid bad behavior because we think, oh, that's breaking the law. I might get in trouble. Or we do better things just for something in this life. But if there is a sort of future life, then we need to recognize that the kind of causes that we are creating, if we do something good with our mind, that is going to benefit us both now in terms of creating more peace and harmony among those we are around, as well as good results in the future. So we need to think long term in a kind of vast, expansive sort of way. We need to think about, again, we've had this past that is beginningless, and we are going to, our consciousness will continue. There's a continuity to that subtle consciousness. And so if we were to die, where will we go? What will happen? Do we have the sort of causes to be born in a hell realm, for example? And so the being of small scope contemplates, I want to avoid those sorts of causes. I want to make sure I don't I want to make sure I avoid that kind of suffering by avoiding its causes. And the being of middling scope sees all of the suffering of samsara as something they want to get out of. For the being of great scope, a Mahayana practitioner, out of their unbearable compassion for the sufferings of all sentient beings, they give rise to a wish to become a Buddha, to be able to fully benefit others. So here we need to recognize that this is a process over time. We change and develop and improve our minds in order to get to those ultimate goals. We can't expect there to be some sort of immediate, instant kind of change. That's not the way that this works. But rather it is through slowly working on our mind that we are able to create these changes and make sure that we avoid those sorts of things like lower rebirths or get ourselves out of samsara, find a way to benefit all sentient beings.
Vậy đối với hàng sĩ phu bậc trung thì họ cầu thoát khỏi cái khổ đau trong sanh tử luân hồi, cho nên họ tu tập về giới định tuệ Và đối với những hàng sĩ phu bậc đại thì nhìn quan sát chúng sinh đang trải qua những khổ đau, các vị không thể nào cam chịu, không có thể chịu đựng được, nên tìm mọi cách để nhanh chóng đạt được Phật quả để cứu vớt chúng sinh nhờ ra khỏi sinh tử luân hồi. Cho nên khi con đường giải thoát nó không phải là ngẫu nhiên mà có, không phải bất chợt mình đạt được, không phải một thời gian ngắn mà đạt được, cho nên chúng ta cần phải có thời gian. Nên cũng cần phải có thời gian để tư duy, học hỏi, thực tập và thực hành, rồi dần dần mình sẽ đạt được đến giải thoát. Nếu chúng ta không có tư duy
Tene sosu ya samle pana dije so na mene ba yimbe sere nga du sem kan kan juan dra yora juan dra chuna sheba na shi sosu samle ya ta ba ta de na sosu yi me che to ba ke ya so ra o nga nge ma me tin de chi ta tin de chi de sha sam sosu ha le de so nga nge ma tin de sam ba tu ja ye ta ta da tin de cha sha sam sa sosu be ha le ko yi me che da tin de jo ra ko sem le juan dra ra ko ta ba ma ro Juan to Colombo session in Yodora. Oh, didn't Tamamusha Mocha, Tondata, Toma Mavana, Tunganyo, Tama Tameva Chirita, Taya which is chewing some, Tungele Taya which is chewing some, and the Tambunga Songi Tungele Yeshita and the Tille, Titso was a Tille make your Shan let saw up Pemba to Roa. Oh, Tentene, Tille Lava, me looking long. Ini Thabkhe dan shenjo nganzu da konzo tanda meba nirin chadan zi ura nganzu chore chi so ura enji meji. O nirin chadan chene ini gile kaga sa yora. Nirin chadan meba gibu dengi roa samlo kiwa che sama. Ini tewa chenpe samlo chena simche tamje kuwa da tungeji nawa de samlo dandu sama ba di chere chodon, nyingji kere chodon. Manzo kadambe Geshe chore tandim ni ti kitu chin domdem besal jaga charre domdem ba khura lamate karna gdo sere Geshe lawdi tambare Geshe lawdi tamba karna gdo sere Geshe kon chin done sa embatin de ringol tribuna cheni godum gyapche takwar singude sara takwar singude sara ya koale semkyone semche tamche tungena samde dungune semkyoere chora ke hako yo mare chi so ya hore chi samkyoere mado so ne jungune de samlutana pe sambakyo chora ko tumche taware shi ngude shumde do chara ni domde ma shamo ma pe je oda ko kyaps chese ta ko chungune ne mate na bi ore sora se ko taware shi komde do de yongju wardo de dungaran so Sambasaro Sarchene, Simja Tamje Truptunke, Kunse, Yunde Kundeji, Kansachel and Guachavi some, teach you any Chuniani, Tabache, Sambache, Samlo, Chutan Yaur Tangi Samsa, or Semkene, Sambashus Chander.
Ngũ nghiên sư rề nghe luôn xe.
No,
Đó mà xem có này ngũ nghiên đi sư rề. Vâng. Đó là ngũ nghiên.
Loudly Tambasa,
Loudly Tambasa.
Drum them by Roa, drum them by Shura, Koran Kiduchite, drum them by Jagayora, drum them by Jarajunesura, Kadambel, Kimberwa, Kadambelana, Lama Chochi Pattern Adishar Chile, Geshe-ma, Kadambella Metora, and you can hear it. Oh, consul chart and the cool. Loudly Tambakarana with Osekishi, and if you knew that Sora.
So here, if we each sort of think about this, we need to recognize that we can actually change our minds. This is something where over time, if we try to improve our minds, we can even like amaze ourselves. We can do things that we might think were unbelievable. Looking at, say, oh, a few years ago, I had this really bad sort of habit or bad way of thinking, and we're able to overcome those, improve our mind more and more. So really, 3, we should reflect upon our own ability to change. This is the nature of our mind. And so since beginningless time, we have experienced all of these different sufferings of samsara, and this will be endless unless we make an effort. So we should think, I'm going to put an end to this cycle of suffering, beginning with avoiding a lower rebirth, gaining a rebirth as a human or a god. And for that purpose, I am going to avoid harming others. I'm going to benefit them as much as I am able to. And continuing that kind of thought, we recognize that cycle, even a rebirth as a human or a god, is still subject to the sufferings of samsara. And so wanting to get out of that cycle of suffering, we try to get rid of attachment and hatred, this kind of being close to some and distant from others, those attitudes of partiality and the sense of I. And so wishing to get out of that, we give rise to that kind of renunciation or thought to get rid of this. We are thinking, I'm going to put an end to that. I'm going to develop my mind in order to get out of this cycle of suffering. And then sort of the Mahayana thought is to go beyond that, recognizing that all mother sentient beings are suffering in this way. And we want to see them get out of that kind of suffering. So it's said that there was the great Kadampa master Langre Tangpa, and once Dromtonpa, the main disciple of Atisha, who was a householder, sort of went to Langre Tangpa, remained in a kind of isolated place, and he was sort of always crying, always kind of like banging his head. And so when Dromtonpa asked, went to visit him, went to see him, and asked him what he was sort of thinking about, why was he acting in that way, Langre Tangpa reminded him that he was thinking about the kind of sufferings of samsara, of all sentient beings. If we really were to reflect upon the actual situation of things, we would sort of always be crying. It would be a sort of, I mean, if we had a real sense of the actual situation that all mother sentient beings are in, that would be the level of compassion, that kind of, so Dromtonpa took off his hat and said, this is a real practitioner here. It's someone that feels that way, reflecting on the suffering of sentient beings. So we should think that we want to become a kind of being that is able to affect the welfare of sentient beings, really truly benefit them. And this is one who has eliminated all fault and developed all good qualities. So for this purpose, we are listening to the Dharma in order to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Nyandu da rangye ge sosu jibu koye tongale tabar chang toba dona ya tongba ni kwamgu gure se rangye tube che tam ya pungbule ten shenbe ta meba pungbule los be kaga yenge ta meba toba cham ji de ma re se tongba ni rangwe ne tube rangye ngoye tube tongba te to gure se ti she ge do tongba ni da trewe semse tongba ni ma do che tongba ni da trewe semse do Gagba laya kekyoshi, tongba nyi tokba da trewe, ene kansalia, shenda tinte komne, negab renga nyomo ngunjuwa tozuta, sem da trewa inaya, gagba inaya sigora, tongba nyi da trewe, sem gagba laya kekyo desu. Tongba nyi tokba da trewe, shenda ji komne rwa, ene tongba nyi da trewe, sem dige, shenda ji komne, nyomo ngunjuwa, Gagba inaya sora, nyomo kondro nga je chatan la soba, negam gagba inaya, yangja ke yongre soda, kasila imba nga zo, diwole yora, chiya meba la soba ra, tingi tinte komte tu, nyomo ngunjuwa kaga pa meba chagora. Tongba nye da trewe sim gagba larian ke kyurdes, sabiyon da cheba pang yo mare, tongba nye mato na te sabiyon da cheba pang tugu mare, te chema yang ke yongre. Dushi mebe nyumju she yo de do dushi mebe nyumju she de ko tingji kum de samlu shita menge samlu sebo menge ndo se sembe wa zamje de sha gora o tinde kinge de nyomu ke yo mara ne ga de meje she gora de ye jung bu de ke ma te tu gora o ti de ko base dushi mebe nyumju she se tena tongni kombar cha so o te so da 동반이 돼 타르바 토바 이네라 사제 고반 토바 이네라 네바르도 동반이 또 그래서 그거라 되는 동이 컨버사스 야 뜻이잖아.
So here then picking up in the text, we are on verse 48, which is teaching that therefore, given what has come above, that even for liberation, a solitary realizer or hearer's liberation, it is necessary to meditate on emptiness. So here in 48, it says, a mind lacking realization of emptiness, in a mind lacking realization of emptiness, the fetters, the afflictions arise again. So here, just by realizing the kind of selflessness that is the lack of a self that is somehow separate, different from the aggregates, a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, that level of realization is unable to get rid of the seeds that lead one to generate the afflictions. And so even though the kinds of minds, like say the afflictions that arise from that kind of grasping at a self might be temporarily stopped, things like pride and attachment and hatred and so forth might be temporarily kind of suppressed or not arising in a manifest way, they haven't been removed in the way that they won't arise again. Their seeds have not been removed. So here, as we were talking about last time, if one is in kind of like a meditative equipoise, one of these high levels of meditative equipoise, as the verse continues, just as in the case of non-conscious meditative equipoise, so those kinds of afflictions will arise again. Thus, one should meditate on emptiness. So here, one might attain this kind of state of a meditative concentration or meditative stabilization, wherein there's no discrimination, no like clear thoughts. And this is something where it's just sort of mere mind. There's nothing really else happening. And one can remain in this kind of state for eons. There aren't manifest afflictions, but there is still the potential for those to arise again. So here, whether one wants to attain liberation, that of a hearer or a solitary realizer, or the state of Buddhahood, in either case, it is necessary to have a realization of emptiness. Just this realization of the selflessness of the person as being a self-sufficient, substantially existent entity, something apart from the aggregates, that alone is not sufficient to remove those kinds of seeds. And so therefore, one should make an effort to realize emptiness.
Bất cứ vị nào muốn chứng được cái giải thoát những khổ đau, muốn đạt được quả A La Hán Ngàn Thanh Văn hay là duyên giác, hay muốn đạt được Phật quả, muốn giải thoát thì nhất định cần phải chứng tính không.
뭐야? 일단 네 된다 네 고요라. 네라 자전바도 저 동이 또요 말을 생각해봐 가셔야 되는 거라. 전주 급수다 동반이 또 그래. 동반이 마도나 타버도 말했었는데 년도 되니서 좀더 많이 될 가봐치요라. 년도 되니 좀더 많이 보되게 네라 자전바 드부터 발라 동반이 또 말해. 동반이의 체다래. 야고 말 가야 매버지 공기요라 삼겨라. 건조리야 네라 자전바 토발이야 동이 또 그래. 동이 마도나 자좀 두고 말했어요라. 마도 내가 자좀 가지고 동이 또 말했어요. 내가 개발 가서 전주 가서 내가 자좀 가지고 동이 또 말했어. 켈레고레스 숭게고레스 말했어. 내가 자좀 가지고 동이 또 그라. 엄마한테 들려줘라. 네가 알아서 그러시나 너네 바단 지자마 저기 내가 자좀 발라 동반이 또 말해. 강사다 공부인지 때 뭐 보세요네 가가 매버 또나 다음에 가서 다음에 뒤도는 저기에 생겼들이야 가고 지거라 어디 질렀네 그래서 뭐야
So here we need to be clear that there are some masters who would say that for the kind of liberation of a hearer or a solitary realizer, one does not need to realize emptiness. But here, according to the kind of position taken in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Shantideva is refuting the assertion of these two Hinayana tenant schools. So again, understand when we talk about Hinayana tenant schools, that's distinct from practitioners. But those who think that the realization of the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person is sufficient to get oneself out of samsara, this is what is being refuted by Shantideva. He's saying that even for a hearer or a solitary realizer, they have to realize the emptiness that is that lack of objective existence from the side of the object, inherent or true existence. And so here we need to be clear that Shantideva does not accept in any way that those hearers and solitary realizers do not have to realize emptiness. He's refuting those kinds of tenant schools who would make such an assertion. So those masters who would assert that are incorrect.
Ở đây nhà Bồ Tát Hạnh không phủ định rằng cái
chúng ta nhìn thấy tình yêu của chúng ta này xin đồng bên nhà mà đâu phải sẽ mình ta sẽ chú công chân trong cái trái chuối bây giờ sẽ ở trên cái trái chuối bây giờ mà đấy sẽ đồng nhà mà đâu là trái chuối thu mà nhà mà bán thu mà đấy sẽ cái đó, ở đây chỉ làm na.
So here, there are those that would assert that by realizing the selflessness that is the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent entity, one can attain the state of an arhat. But here, that is being refuted. Shantideva does not accept that one could realize or could become an arhat without the realization of emptiness. So here, this is what is being sort of refuted, not accepted in any way.
Không đoạn phiền não thì vì đó không đạt được giải thoát.
Ôi ya tan dine mà ngã gan đó thì là chúng ta sẽ solo cả sum biểu đó, solo cả sum thì cái thế giới cả trục biểu đó, thế bây giờ bây giờ giờ xong thì sao, thế bây giờ bây giờ sẽ riêng cái đó là sao, bây giờ cả rest trục biểu đó, đi trục biểu solo cả sum cái gì mà đấy, đi cái số tanda, cái số chuyên chú cái thế bây giờ bây giờ đó. Jaha Pandita Zevara, Shijun Lodra Singatan Zevara, Shijun Lodra Se, Pandita Zevara, Shunju Jabashora. Odinam, Disholga Sumde, Shunju Ranga Shun Mare Sungara. Karesan, the teaching cartu, the teaching cartu at the Tagan Goya to your Tidinyamdo to Gurus, the drama Bayan de Odish to Kuto. This on the Shunju Ranga Shun Mare, Chemachiga. 주샤브레스 송교라 텐데 송주요라 개바송 마샤게 고 주주에 뭐 시샤제 로아시자 어디질라면
So here, then the next three verses, so 49, 50, and 51, establish that the perfection of wisdom sutras are the speech of the Buddha, that these Mahayana sutras are the speech of the Buddha. Now, there are a number of masters, including one of the Indian masters, his Tibetan name is Shijung Lodra, who would assert that these verses are actually not part of the original text, because they should have come above, wherein they were refuting that the sort of Hinayana position. But most of the other masters who have made who have commented on this text would say that this is actually part of the original text, these three verses.
ngā sūdhū tā kīpī shēshabē ngā sī gōrā kāne lā yadī ngā sī gōrā tā shūng dī lā sī gōrā tīkbā chīmbī shūng tō tsō sī gōrā ngā kā dōdī lā jū tē sī kēdī sāngyē sūng dī nā sī kērāngi ngā kāng shī sī sūng rā sūng kā shī yani tīngi jī kum chū tēmbē dōdī tīngi jī kum chū tēmbā lī jū gēn dōdī tēndē chē rā yani chūtīm jī lā bā tēmbē doye tenuche ani lando shiche nechu chima chishin yima ye tauche shiyage ngombe tenuche o tende tenu somdi labo somdi chocha chebe chane sanje ge song yesu dogo doa se gora nga gan dode la jote kete sanje song ye bakeran dogo doa se tinde na tekba chimbe shong pecha sama ani chutim gilaba temba 땡이 쟁길라바 땡바 시럽길라바 땡바 셰지레세 마차 라 대진 배지 계좌게 도다 송디 매남세 계란저 되네 사기에 까인세 라바 추림길라바 라 아니 땡이 쟁길라바 시럽길라바 땡바 샤네 사기에 까인세나 택바 쳔베 돌레 계란 따다 티나시 떠요레세 계속다 택바 사기에 송에세 대바 매남된 더 구그레세 제제 내가 제제디 단다 식바 요레세 그라 다 야티치라
Oh, so here then in verse 49, it reads, you may say that those utterances that correspond to the sutras are acknowledged as the Buddha's words. So here, when it comes to usually when we say utterances, we mean like verbal speech, but this is really referring to those texts. So the things like, for example, the sutras, which teach meditative stabilization, the basket of the Vinaya, which teaches the practice of ethics, and those teachings of the Abhidharma or the higher knowledge that go into the various objects of knowledge, what is to be adopted and abandoned. And so you assert those three baskets as the Buddha's teaching, and most of those are actually basically the same as what is taught in the Mahayana sutras. So why is it then, as it continues, why then do you not approve of the Mahayana, most of which is similar to your revered sutras? So here, most of what is taught within the Mahayana is essentially the same, corresponding to those three baskets. So why then, as there's no sort of contradiction between the Mahayana teachings and those three baskets, why then do you not accept it as being the teaching of the Buddha, the speech of the Buddha?
Đây là những cái câu kệ mà chứng minh là kinh Đại Thừa là dạy của Đức Phật.
就是说，哦呀，给的马到这个那时候，他们这捐单这个那些，今年呢这个，这个前边上届搞一些，今年呢这个，那这两个，是吧？那捐都第三届搞嘛这些，同搞明白同呢，跟那东北人这边多的是吧？哦，第要不嘛这三届送嘛这些，小几个。 산제 계란 대바 매번에서 산제가 많이 벌써 되게 산제 송상만 대중이 소럽 탐제 산제가 말해서 슬라바든 지금 말해서라 로 그때 마도 지게니 탐제 견다 제버려서 근데 대바 친구 도가가 산제 송 말해서 라바이나서라 초치디 템바 멤버십 계란 통에 탐제 템바 말해서 이나서라 도sun 지게 탐제네 자외 송바 지마에서 근데 택바 신부 너나리야 산제 송다 총바 지위나 너 가시 산제 송다 총바 망부여라 망샤도 총바여라 다 동반이 때마다 근데 말이지 총바 지위나 뒤대한 택바 신부 너데 택바만 변도 산제 송다 총바 지위가 되게 네 택바 신부 너 참아 산제 송바에서 총바 가르쳤는데요 말했어 거라 되고 그래서다 도sun 지기 탐제네 자외 송바 지면 됐어 Tina mitimba chi yubade kanga yabu mara sanje sumare sena tega timba sanje sumba timba chi yude kanga timba rese laba karsena madire lab kugrese ora ya tinja.
Câu kệ số 45.
So then continuing into the next verse, it says, so here, if the entire Mahayana canon is corrupt or you're unwilling to accept it because of one exception, then since one Mahayana sutra is comparable to the Hinayana canon, why are they not all spoken by the victor? So here, if you say that due to, say, the teachings on emptiness, that you see something that you don't accept, like as a fault, as something like the teaching on emptiness, then you use that to say that everything else contained within those Mahayana scriptures is corrupt or is not true. Then this really is like quite something to say, because most of the Mahayana sutras are comparable, teach the same thing as the Hinayana canon, and so why would they not be all spoken by the victor, by the Buddhas? So given other than certain differences like emptiness, for example, they're basically basically the basis is the same. And so just because you think that this one thing, emptiness, makes it not valid as the Buddha's word, it seems like if you found one other sort of exception, why say that the whole thing is corrupt? Basically that that one could equally claim that they are all authentic because some of them meet the sort of criteria for authentically being the Buddha's teachings.
Đó là một cách để lý luận.
Sanje kayena shiroji paru chimbe dotezo sanje ji kayena nyande chimbu yusun la sokwa tezoge te kongba to ni shehu de te kongba to medose ha ko medose te sonda de sanje kamare se gora nga ka yusun chimbo la sokbe tingdo ma jurwa se te dotezo ting chimba ta ngwe ne chi yimba de to yo mare se gora keni kyeje 마도베 송제 멤버 수신지 어디 결하게 니 시진도 디 단디 친지 말로바 예바데 결하게 마도베 주생지 니 태과 전부 너도 산제게 송보 마레세 근데 송아자르게 마레세 거라 송제 멤버 수시지에서 데니 최제 마도베 태과 전부 너의 바 송아자와 켈레네 디그 마른 삼나 디그 마레시 수시지데 제리게 마레세 거라
Nên bên
So then continuing, it says, this is a doctrine whose depths were not fathomed even by Maha. Who then would refuse to accept it simply because you fail to understand it? So here, the sort of rebuttal to this is, well, if it is the speech of the Buddha, these Mahayana sutras and so forth, then why is it that the great kind of Shravaka arhats, like Kaishyapa and Maha and so forth, were not able to see this as being sort of the nature of reality, as being authentic? They were not willing to see and accept them. And so here, the sort of response to that is that, well, just it's not right to reject it just because you are not able to understand it. So it's not logical to just to say that this, because you're not able to fathom it or you're not able to comprehend it, that it is therefore not the speech of the Buddha, that it is something to be rejected.
Oh yeah. Chujurang Chimade, Chimachi Chushavandrasi, Dreamite Shenche, teaching Katunita, the share for the Tisha set, so the Shulga Sum Tisumdere, Tindisa.
yeah.
Oh, that didn't do that. Minebe Yang de Toga. Minebe Yang de Nyande de Leniora. Nyandu Trasubata, Rangi Trasubata, Soso Tarva Tobato Cheche, Soso Tarva Sera, Soso Rangi, Tarvato Cheche. Ya donge lam dirwa ti nyande ta ranjinira nyande ji nyande tarbasna nyande sna tunge pambe pamba kasin gokde shemba de ngokba pambe te bo shemba o te sigora nyande ji nyande gokte tu sibara gokbe te ba panse te pang goksha ge yoma ju kange del sigora sebe seba pambe pamba del sigora nyande su nyange Tungelen deva del tunge sebe del nyangde sigora nyange tungelen deva tunge sebe del sigora nyangde del ni ora nyangde da ene kase mine be nyangdes sishi talemene sanje gi nyomo bada shije tiba niga pangba sigora sanje tuju o dele mine be nyangde sigora mine be nyangde siba koya ne gmara Nemo Kanga Pansare, Shidu Kanga Pansare, Siba Koyatala Negmarwa, Yamamabane, Sitali Negro, Koa Kotenga to Sibetal Negera, Sitali Menevasera, and Shitali Mene, Shitaser, Shivetas the Nyandu, the Range to do, Rangi Koyakiatam, Rangi Koyakam, Yarangi, Yamutsam Sebatelia, Shitasegora, Shivate Tarwa. Yanderwa, Tinane Tama, Rajibu Koe Kyote says some good Esora. Munechene, Shangi Tina Tuya Tandalia, Mishibe Mumba Shitib de Sage, Ticores, Chota Joanna. So Koe Tunga de Taru, some Yinya de Sonza, the Karsura. Karsur Yangde Tasigora. Tani Segra, Sibeta, Yangeli Debe Tasigora. Sibetadi, Ledan Yamu Kona, Sital Neverwa. Naranzo Sital Nera. The Sanji Jumde de Yangde, Sibetal Negmar, Siba Pansara, Yamu Pansara, Shivetal Negmar, Ragi Koe Chesam, Ragi Yamu Pansamare, Simja Tamjik to be Mishibe Mumba Pambar, Shijetiba Pansara, Shidip. Nyamu nyudip dan shidip singi yora tibalia. Nyamu nyudip sidese nyamu ko kondo ngaje chadon densim singe danzirwa. Shidip sidese ko sheje tamje soso semni. Sheje tamje shebala tiba shiwara tili shidip sigwara. Shebe shidip di taasuna ne shebe be kanga shetum gwara. Dema dadu do sangma shetum ge. Shebe koran rang shindi sewa shetum ge shidwa. Di kyun di chang ko tar shimbo reso na 상만 시에 도구하라. 미시베 몸바 강가 세도를 시듭시거라데. 시제 탐제 뒤치도 시에발이야. 집에들이 시듭시거라. 디니가 빠서는 미네베냐데. 산제진냐데들 미네베냐데. 냥데다 랑게 택바메 벨람르쇼네. 냥데들이야니 코에게와 체삼진냐데. 시타스요. 시에 타스라. 저 타니라미네 바스. 산제긴냐데 타니라미다. 시바코알라 네마레 Shivarangi Koe Kiva Chesam Yade Maris. Or teacher Lamna and Diva Madishana Kodure.
So that ends then those three sort of contested verses, some that are disputed by Indian masters as being part of the original text of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, as they say that they should have come earlier in order to establish the Mahayana. But regardless, now turning to the next verse 52 then establishes the path of non-abiding nirvana. So here, when we talk about nirvana, there are basically two types of nirvana that we can talk about. Here in this, okay, so nirvana, when it comes to nirvana, the main sort of a hearer or a solitary realizer, someone who is striving for their own liberation from samsara, they have achieved a cessation that is the cessation of suffering, the kind of extinction of those various afflictions, such that they have attained a kind of freedom from those things which are to be abandoned, that which is to be eliminated. So when we refer to nirvana, this is literally passing beyond suffering. And when a hearer or a solitary realizer achieves that kind of passing beyond suffering, they have cut this continuing to take rebirth within samsara. They no longer have afflictions, but they have not removed the obscurations to omniscience. In order to attain the state of non-abiding nirvana, here, this involves the cessation of the afflictions as well as those kind of cognitive obscurations or the obscurations to omniscience. So non-abiding nirvana is non-abiding in the sense that one doesn't abide in samsara. One is no longer subject to samsara rebirth, but nor does one abide in the extreme of peace, having this just peace for oneself. But rather one is able to attain this supreme state of being able to benefit beings by abiding in neither extreme. You have removed the kind of afflictive obscurations that cause repeated rebirth within samsara. So one isn't like an ordinary being like us who's still in the extreme of samsara, but nor do they abide in the kind of extreme of peace. They have abandoned the cognitive obscurations. And here, these two types of obscurations, the afflictive obscurations are like our various afflictions, are grasping at true existence and then attachment and aversion and pride and jealousy and so forth. And the obscurations to omniscience, or the kind of cognitive cognitive obscurations is that which prevents our mind from coming to its full culmination of being omniscient, of being able to realize all objects clearly, sort of bringing that clarity of mind to its perfection. And so when one has abandoned both of those, the afflictive obscurations as well as the cognitive obscurations, then one attains non-abiding nirvana, where you're not abiding in either extreme, where you're not subject to some repeated rebirth within samsara due to the afflictions, but nor do you abide in a peace that is just sort of the cutting of one's own suffering. Instead, a bodhisattva, as it says here in verse 52, the bodhisattva's presence in the cycle of existence for the sake of those suffering due to confusion is brought about by their freedom from attachment and fear. This is the result of realizing emptiness. So here, it's not as though a bodhisattva is still subject to the kind of causes that lead to samsaric rebirth. They don't remain in that extreme, but nor are they remaining within the extreme of their own peace, wherein they have cut the continuum of their own repeated birth, their own suffering, but have not yet removed the cognitive obscurations. So here, this will make sense then for what comes below. Sorry, I read the verse ahead of time, but this is really establishing the path of non-abiding nirvana then in verse 52.
mong be tong ye chen de de se do mong be tong ye chen ten do se de ga sa da chue ji da dong jin be ga sa da chue ten ba zhu ban jin be ding jin la mong be wa ge so da mong be tong ye chen do ko ye tong ye chen nam ji sim chen nam ji ten do so da mong be tong ye chen de do se cha da se ne so so ge ro ko la cha be le nyu ji wa ge ko ko de ge te ne sibe ta la lo re se ko da cha da se che ji ta le zhe wa o te ni ya nian de de ran jie zha chen ba zu se ko da nian de de ran jie zha chen ba zu dong ye jin ji ne se ko da ji ta le zhe wa se dong ye jin ji ne ko ye dong ye jin ji da che ne ko na de ni ju sam ta ta ne ko ye dong ye be ye sun da che ne 배팅 지금이 타반 교바 토는 마도 라치고 탐지 된다 맞추나 뒤 섬기어라 코에 동에기 신도 지내서라 시베케와 체 잠게 양대서라 시베케와 체 잠게 양대서데 아니 시베 양대기 탐마데다 양대가 소소 된다데 드롭섬지를 마도서라 말아서 된다래서 더 코라치고 된다데 드롭섬데 셴케 마르세르 조라 뒤선데서라 양헬린 데베 탈라 내가 말했어라 지탈레 들어와서 코르 네바 드럽주르와 데니 동인 제부인세 코에 동에 지내바 드시라 코에 코 네바 드럽주르와 자주 선바도야 코알레 네야레 대삼지 숨비오 말에 당보다 민주 기도 숨비로와 제마 섬제게 더 드럽네 코알레 네발라 가지비 와네 다 코알레 네데 섬제나 된다 망치 투도 섬제 섬제 강가 사게 중가라 사마게 섬제가 더 드럽네 대기서 된데 섬로 코위와라 자코 소소 코에 동엘레 타로 쪼치기 오마로와 디디 제마 방세 니가 미네베냐데 통도래 시베 탈라에 내가 말해 시베 탈라 내가 얘나 레다 녀무 보게 내가 말해 닝지데 몰람 보게 내가 말해 니지다 몰람게 왕게 건데네 체도 삼네 코아 동엘에 끼와쇼 셋게베 끼와랑제 심비에다 두비와라 티인데코 샤주 제마 타바토도 시달라메네 아니 시달라메네베 타닐라메네베 냥데도 두고라 지번이가 방게 녀모담에 시베 모번이가 방게한테 두고라 어디지럽네 대소다 타니 라 미네베 냥데서 타닐라 미네베 냥데 토와라 네버도 동니 토고 그래서 거라 되는 동니 가서 미데 냥데 토바테야 동반이 콤벤테 부레서 야 동반이 콤발을 때네 미네베 냥데 토고 그래서 했단다리야 어딘데
Câu số 52.
So here then in verse 52, it says again, it was the Bodhisattva's presence in the cycle of existence for the sake of those suffering due to confusion is brought about by their freedom from attachment and fear. So here it is out of sentient beings, kind of confusion, delusion, grasping at a self of persons and phenomena, grasping at their true existence, that they cycle in samsara. So for the sake of those suffering sentient beings, us ordinary beings, like we grasp at, we have attachment for our truly existent aggregates and so forth. So here where it says again, is brought about by their freedom from attachment. So we, as ordinary beings, have attachment toward the things of samsara, or we're attached towards things as being truly existent. And the other side of that is their freedom from fear. Fear referring to then the kind of state of a hearer or a solitary realizer who is just striving to accomplish their own aims. They're not they have given rise to aversion towards samsara, this renunciation of that, and therefore they're striving, they have that fear towards samsara. That's kind of the extreme that they are in. They are they have accomplished their own aims and then are just sort of abiding in that extreme of peace. But for a bodhisattva, out of compassion for the suffering of these sentient beings in samsara, they instead take rebirth within samsara. Their own aims are not primary, but rather out of compassion, due to the force of compassion and prayers, they take rebirth in samsara. It's not something that they fear in the way a hearer or a solitary realizer fears that and wants to get out of it. Although they have a kind of revulsion towards samsara, their compassion causes them to then take rebirth within samsara. Again, not out of the force of their karma and afflictions, but out of their compassion and prayers. And so it is when one is freed from the two obscurations, the afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations, you're then freed from the two extremes, the sort of extreme of one's own peace alone, as well as the extreme of samsara. And this then, it says, is the result of realizing emptiness. So when we have this kind of Mahayana attitude and an understanding of emptiness, this is the result.
Ngebardo tongbanyi kongo rese tongbanyi makomne kansada phumbuny rawa ngo thade meba cham kombate digma resora tena joa koala jawar doba namje tongbanyi ngebardo komko res tishegora tedar tongbanyi chola sunji bane tema es tende soja tongbanyi ti tarwa tobalo komko marese Tongbanyi rangwine prube tongbanyi nani kanga tongbari mebara do sam shigiyor da chebe ta lundu wisam yora kaya mengi sa do sam yora kedar tongbanyi chola sunji bane nyumaya tongbanyi kombati chedare tongbanyi tebe shejeng do sanji song ma rese rangwine tongna ta zu sa mengi re chaw yore tara chine korwa sobu tamare sem tamare di tamare chera and the Menge so the Sobiora, Tam Heber Sambiora. The Tam Heber the Review Mara, 풍불에 떼진 레버죠. 떼네 딱 봤으면 다 샤고 알아. 떼 샤토고 말아. 네바도 디리스 치 주고 주세지. 템부치 맨에 드금도 삼겨라. 근데치 요 말아 다도 뭐 참말이 요 말아. 그라마인게 가셔지 소 아니 들려 민지 따지 샤니 티시거라. 마도 나스디 라와르치 이하나 마도 드금도 삼티 라와치 매나 니 지기와라. 당가 맹게 차도 삼자리시. 티시거라. 제처럼 된대게 저 동반이 초리아 순진버스네 괜찮버스고라 셰다르 뒤dom버 사기 소마르시 어떤데 셰버데 지금마르스고라 순진반의 테마인세 가르스네 원에 동반이 트베르바 마부셰고라 되나 태좀 메사와라 동반이네 콤버샤 되나 태좀 메바 코에 동멜레 타르바 되바 이네 녀모pan 되고요나 동반이 콤고레서 랑운에 동바 콤고레 가르스니 랑원에 두번 집에 집어도 코에 싸워지거라. 나 라와시 랑원에 나랑 그 삼사르지 이거 삼로 코고도 뒤에는 뒤 코에 싸워지거라. 뒤 동부도 와서는 아니 내에서야 돼. 숙침부 시부지 제도 나도 냠도 거디네 동게서 예베스리 뒤에 매게데 하고 그거라. 나 이월에 참아요 거 말해. 아니 나서 건조 생겼을 때 숙침부 용거 말해. 탄예삼 지경이 민지 따네 시작하가 하고 해야 된다 민지 따봐서 마도 저게 근데 라와도 주베 나에다 딱 쇼다 현저에 매버데 하고 누구라 근데 동행해 봐도 콤버샤스 근데 태좀에서 동이 공부를 가르쳐 동반이도 주베 르고 원에 시에그래 세거라 르베 주비 와라고 뭐 내주도 템버체 뭐 코랑게 내당 원에도 레디거라 뒤쪽이어라 다 마인게제 레스 좀기스로 시에요 말아 어디치로야
So then, therefore, it continues in the next verse. For those who are striving. So for those who are striving for liberation, it's advising here that it's logical to meditate on emptiness. So this comes in verse 53. So here, if we want to have freedom from the cycle of suffering, then it's not sufficient to realize the kind of selflessness as it is explained in the two Abhidharma texts, but rather one needs to realize emptiness. So it's not logical to reject emptiness, or it's not sort of logical. Again, those who take fault with emptiness, as it is explained in the Mahayana Sutras, would say that this means nothingness, means like that there's nothing whatsoever. You fall into an extreme of nihilism by saying that there is no objectively existent self. Like if you assert that kind of lack of objective existence or lack of true existence, then that means that there's nothing whatsoever. We need to be able to point to something that exists as the self, not something that is maybe separate, totally different from the aggregate. Such a self doesn't exist, but they would say there must be something that we can point to. For the Prasangika Madhyamakas, they would say, well, yes, there is. There's the merely designated self, but there is nothing that has the kind of objective, true existence that we ascribe to it. So here, this is, again, there are those who think that there needs to be something that one can point to. They sort of become afraid of what would happen if there is no such objective existence. But here, there's no refutation of this that can logically be presented. It will get into more of the reasonings establishing emptiness below. But here, when we have a realization that there is no such objectively, truly existent I, we will no longer grasp at the mind. We will no longer grasp at us and them. And therefore, we won't give rise to attachment and aversion and all of the various afflictions that come from that grasping at an objectively, truly existent I or self. And so this is the root of samsara. This grasping is what causes us to repeatedly take rebirth. So here, while someone who has this understanding can see that conventionally speaking, we can talk about us and them and so forth. Those things don't exist in the sort of autonomous, objective way that we grasp at them as having. And this is something that we can establish with logic. This will be presented below. But here, as it says in this verse, since no refutation, no logical refutation can be laid forth that will, with regard to emptiness. So there is no doubt that realization of emptiness is to be cultivated. If we really examine with logic, we can't disprove that this is the root of samsara, and therefore that the realization of emptiness is what is necessary to eliminate it. And some of the various reasonings and logic will come below in some of the following verses.
Ti meba songe nyembote tabude karesna tongbani toba shirapte resora kena sheje trebaye membe nyembo tongbani se ti sonja ko nyamo pangure tarwa tobala te nyembote tongbani tobe shiro konno mada yomare sheje treba pangure ne tongbani tobe shiro kongure ti ne ta nyoto sanje je ko toba deba yenada tarwa toba kandeji ne ko tongbani ngeba do kongure se Nudo tamje kendebe teni chidar kombar meche de kombar rigre kombar chakugre se teni chidar kom meche de komkugre se sungudwa ode chalana.
Câu kệ số 54.
So then continuing in the next verse, the antidote to the darkness of afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations is the realization of emptiness. Why do those who desire to attain omniscience not swiftly cultivate it? So here, the antidote, that which acts as an antidote to either our afflictive obscurations or both the afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations, the thing that is able to get rid of that in the way that sort of light can get rid of darkness is emptiness. This is what can act as an antidote. Other than that, there is nothing which can eliminate our afflictive obscurations and these obscurations to omniscience. So if we would like to quickly become a Buddha, we need to cultivate then this proper kind of antidote that can eliminate both of those obscurations. Again, even for liberation, just the removal of the afflictive obscurations, one needs emptiness, but even more so for than the removal of both of those obscurations.
Chữa trị hay là tiêu diệt được cái bóng tối của phiền não chướng và sở tri chướng.
Nyamon bata so uma tante di uma bata uma tengyo lorba uma da. Nyamon bata ne ko kansa rangu ne truba jemba rawa. Ani kansa rangya tuwe sayo du truba jemba tazu kanga nyamon rawa. Ne deja kontro nga je chato ntren simla soba tazu kanga nyamon rawa. Nyamon be truba sigura. Tazu wange kwa kogi ora ti pana ne tarwa togi ora. Je shiche truba sidi nga rangu ne truba jemba che kanda kanga bati rangu ne rawa trayi ne rangu ne trayi bachi. Nye ina rangu ne nye bachi. Yidu wa ina rangu ne yidu wachi. Yidu mewa ina rangu ne yidu mero wachi. Tende chi samlu chi ora. Ti pakcha dere. Pakcha de. Tile ya shitib si ora. Pakcha sido te ko yuebe shul jab chi legi ora. Ngarazu neje chi nali ya chi kokpa re chi soba ina kokpa so. Ani kokpa pepa meba so chane tanda ko chima tozu shul jab chi ko yuebe shul chi tegira. Sheba tozu nyemu ba tozu ke pa meba rido ngala ngondo chokpe se shakbe neba sigira. Ko meba rido ko di neba chi shagi ora. Ngarazu kondu re chi esona kondu se na kondu ma jam sona te neba de sem kali chi shagi ora. Tila pakcha si ora. O taga na shi nga je da chado kare na nyemo ke esona ya kewe samlu chi ke esona kewe samlu de meba chana sem ki tendu neba chi te ora. Shul chi. O tila ya pakcha si ora. Shitib kare esona lo dili ya pakcha. Nga rangu ne truban jimbe jimba. Di pakcha te si ora. 박차시 티네시니 템버 나와서 오라 템버 나와테 상 제가라면 봐도 대위와래 군주치 낭 신제들 랑원에 주와 낭 대위와래 무슨도 또 안에 시다 여름 붙인 사라 단다 랑원에 주와 낭 대위와래 쟁기와 말에 삼기와 말에 랑원에 주와 낭 대위와래 나람도 때는 가서라 그 생각이 그만큼 되우시 달라도 되서나 코로나 되우시 달라도 남기와라 그 쟁기와 말에 멤버 하고 위와라 가가 이내 공예매 박차로 숙치다 쉬네 나다 가리네 치랑원에 주바 이 낭대가라 쟁기와 말에 삼기와 말에 나와들 박 시집시거래 니도와 녀몽배 박차다 아니 랑원에 주바 나와대 다상 계스는 나와대 소르거라 박차 쉬대 박차매 나와대 요 말에 당원에 전에게 시작거랑 내주팅만 나그리마도 들라 나와리아 주바 용거 말와 어디 질랍나 녀몽보다 시제 집어셔야 돼 걸었잖아.
Đúng không? Bên đây chúng ta biết
So here, then when it comes to the kind of understanding of these two types of obscurations, again, as we have here, the antidote to the darkness of the afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations is the realization of emptiness. So again, according to this system, as opposed to the kind of thing that is able to eliminate our afflictive obscurations being that selflessness that is understanding the person's lack of being a self-sufficient, substantially existent entity. Here, one needs to understand the lack of objective existence, that things don't exist from their own side. That is what is able to eliminate the kind of grasping at things as truly existent. So we have, though, in addition to that, the kind of imprints that are left, the predispositions, the propensities of things as being established from their own side. When something appears to us as pleasant, it seems like it's pleasant from its own side, or something unpleasant from its own side. So here, that kind of active like grasping at things as having that sort of objective or true existence is what we refer to as the afflictive obscurations, and they're the sort of seeds of that. And then there is the kind of imprints, the remnants of that, which in this system of the Prasangika Madhyamaka are asserted to be the cognitive obscurations. So here, there's sort of the remnants that are left over from, again, since beginningless time, we have had this grasping at true existence. And so there's sort of an imprint that's left over, even once we have eliminated the kind of manifest grasping. So here we can think about it like if we have anger, even once that manifest anger is gone, there's sort of a propensity, these predispositions of anger that are left on the mind, sort of remnants of that. Or if we have had a virtuous mind, there's the manifest mind, and then there's the kind of imprints that are left over. So here, when it comes to the kind of appearance of things as being truly existent, at a certain point, a bodhisattva is able to not grasp at those as being truly existent. They recognize that they are not truly existent, but they still have the kind of appearance of that. The appearance of true existence will last until one attains Buddhahood. So we can sort of liken it again. There's that example of an illusionist who conjures up something illusory on the basis of a stick or a stone or whatever it may be. And although there is the appearance of that illusion, he doesn't grasp at it as being real. And so here, when it comes to the afflictive obscurations, it is that active kind of grasping and the seeds of that grasping. But the imprints of the afflictions are the sort of those predispositions are asserted to be the cognitive obscurations. And it is only once one gets to the point of Buddhahood that one no longer has even the appearance of things as being truly existent, because a Buddha sees everything in accordance with reality. They aren't sort of subject to those false appearances. But here, according to this system, then the afflictive obscurations refer to that kind of active grasping as well as its seeds, and the cognitive obscurations are then like the imprints, the remnants that are left over, that are the final thing to be removed in order to get to that state of omniscience.
Kaya marwa namju ngara zo su sambe na nga de kande je sambe do ti me so yora nga se de sobu pa sha sem pa chi so lo so rang ne zu se de je ta se ba che se ba che ka ba yo se nga de yo se de te yo ba chi sambe do ba ba ni ka re je du zan de nga yin da se Mongolia so de de nga yin da se ka je che san de de chi do ba jin zu zo da nga yin da se Kogwala jadi shinalol sarjan mwamwere ke yomara neko rawando yobare samgitwa ki yomare sana ne jigba jigdo sora shena jigdo sora ta ke mendo asamsare che ta di jigba ke umare sigora kera jigba ke de ngune nga rawa yobateli jigba ke ure se ti nyamo kanga nyawda kanga te yongo re sigora ki tume ke jire teli jina teli jigure sigora nga se rawa de meba komshana 근데 지고 지고요 말에 지사 게 면도 삼비하래 때네 딱 봤으면 가시래 마도 지게 나 근데 지고 같이 시부지 로서 여 댕기시 매번 삼로 걸어잖아 동반이 겁나 동반이 건별로든 지고 매번 차요 그래서거라 지고 세지 될 계란 지게요 그래 지고 말해서 지는 나 상랑 지여 번지 아니 미기 지에서 어떤 알지 용기사니 지고 지 강가 용거라 나서 동반이 삼대는 제 존에 세부 존나 딘데베 할레베체 땅할 시정고 삼딘데 삼로 숙침부터 용마래 착단 숙침부터 용거 말해 어디서도 되시거라 어디 저도 안에 동이 권배네 짝박기도 한테 권번 매자세 산je 딘데 주성도 말해 세거라 땅 알아서 나와던 로에 가보래 되거라 저 강걸 동번이 세고요 말해 지단에 대바신부 동번이 세야 돼 뒤에 로래야 추통게 또저 삼로 코르토게 삼로 코나 시나기 지바기 텐데 메싱게 셀이야 그거라 트라겐게 셀이야 오늘 동번이 셀이 야부도 아삼사 가와겐게레시 그거라 텔리시야 거라 타이는 알아 등산시데 강갈 수이네 셰샤데 코카르 삼마삼마산팅한케 나 셰데 바 셰샤 그러지 코카기네데 토기네데 산 셰샤그라 문에서는 뒤에 감다 삼발 전에 셰고요라 대보심부터죠 동반이도 강가를 다 여선 거라 산지 좀 되게 뒤에 감전에 가실이야 다 여르다 선거래 풍부하게 쿠르 디나로 댕게 다 여르다 सब서 지마도 양 코란지 시안에 뱅겨라 저는 다 여르다 라왕에 다 여르다 그래서 सब서 지마도 풍부하게 나로 내가 다 여르다 손셔데 니콜로 되어 여르 같이 여섬겨라 뒤에 가서래 양 가실이야 다 여르는데 예배 마서 매바 마서 쇼여래 예선에는 아니 그 따뜻한데 예배관이야 다들 시부지에 나서 따뜻해도라 매선은 따뜻하게 만들었네 대지 레버리지에 다다 때네 딱 와서 삼을 코르토요 말아 따뜻하게 매기 차도사 다 개와 매 대과 매 스케 만들었음 추나 버시데 삼삼 삼을 코요라 뭐야 뒤지 소나 인디 말로시네 그래 뭐가 동에 계셔봐서 뭐 가시 동에 계버리 제바들이야 아니 텔레 딱밖에 고래 서라 동에 제에 가르서 나 삼가랑 시부지에 봐지 아니 나에 삼 아니 나조 건조 세팅데 삼데 대지밖에 거래 되게 맨데버 강가게 거라 대지밖에 회시데 텔레시에 고래 서라 마하바나 동에 제에 시가가 대지고라 단데 메기 강가 대서고라 어디 동에 제에 시를 서라 뭐가 동에 제에 봐 텔레 딱밖에 줄나세 텔레 딱밖에 고래세 que cubre que ordena asura que carece 동바 동에 시티 텔레탁바 que cubre tinga 동에 que percebe care tangente nga sam가랑 아치여 삼 와, se shanda tugure chonde alle chonde digme saura shanda so ine menasa ngadil shoji tichigdo ti 동에 계절에 텔레탁으로 해서 나 대화 강간요도 지사비네 就是那俺是个给钱的，就得俺给钱的是，听有这种歌的。但这是俺给钱的，但是大过什么的，给么多什么的给么说的，就是么多时代给么多名大什么的么都给我们的。对，这我解释的，我讲让我那主办人吧，第了照顾的也是，我讲东西解决吧，第了照顾解决呢，日本的也是我的，东西细节吧。第了几个记得的，东北人公司那叫人几个刚刚新州的是的，别咱们就那些几个是不是几个多啊？那是不是啊？不是不是，这全部成的，那第了几个几个了，我第没有写的，第了几个嘛的，第了搞过的送过来，东西细节吧，第了几个记得的给的个嘛的呀，第了呢，我留着。
So here then the next verse 55 is kind of like a summary of what has been said above. So here what we really should think is that we should have a kind of respect for emptiness, and that this is what is able to actually pacify our suffering. Now, there are some who don't want to meditate on emptiness because by teaching it to them, it makes them afraid. Like there's a sense of nothingness. Like by hearing that there is no existence, no objective existence, no autonomous existence in the way that things appear to us, they think that there is nothing whatsoever. And so there's a kind of fear that arises because of this nihilistic kind of view. They think that what emptiness is teaching is that there is sort of nothing. If you can't have something that you could point to as being the thing that you identify, like, when we're sort of grasping at a self strongly and we're thinking like, I, it's like we can just point to ourselves, like we're right here, this thing right here. And so we have that strong kind of grasping. And there are those for whom hearing about emptiness gives rise to a kind of fear. Like they don't think that there's anything whatsoever, and therefore it leads to a kind of nihilism. Like there's nothing whatsoever. They have fear at that. So here, really though, what one should be afraid of is that grasping at things as being truly existent, because it is that kind of attitude, that kind of mind that is actually the cause of all of our various sufferings. So other than there being a merely dependently originated self, dependently designated kind of self, there is no such I in the way that it appears to that kind of ignorance. And thereby that's actually what pacifies our suffering. So here, if we actually sort of think about it, this is able to eliminate the kind of strong grasping that we might have, that kind of strong sense of an I, and all of the afflictions that come from it. But here, emptiness is actually, it's really said that it's not something that should be explained to everyone. There are some that will have a misunderstanding. They'll fall into that kind of nihilistic extreme. And so in reality, like nowadays, we just sort of explain to everybody. We don't have a kind of regard for whether it might be the appropriate teaching or not. We just explain it regardless. But really, there are some for whom hearing about a self is better. It's actually sort of by the Buddha teaching, oh, there is a self within there, within your aggregates. There is this self that you have to protect, and you need to act well for the sake of that self. That can be beneficial for those who are not yet able to understand emptiness. It can be more beneficial to hear that there is some sort of a self that they need to be aware of. They need to do virtuous actions for, and so forth. But really, when it comes to it, the thing that we should fear is not emptiness, not this kind of realization, when misunderstood, means a kind of nihilism. But what one should fear is that grasping at things as being truly existent. That is what is creating all of our unhappiness. So here, when it comes to, as it says in this verse, let fear appropriately arise towards something that produces suffering. But since realization of emptiness pacifies suffering, why should it be dreaded? I mean, really, when we actually contemplate the way that things are, we shouldn't be afraid of emptiness, but rather we should have joy at that. We should have a kind of like, wow, this is the thing that is going to get rid of my suffering. This realization is what will eliminate all of my suffering. Whereas sometimes it's the opposite, that we fear emptiness because we have this understanding of it as being like nihilistic, that there's nothing whatsoever. But here, this verse really corrects that course. Let fear appropriately arise towards something that produces suffering, that grasping at things is having kind of autonomous, objective existence. But since emptiness pacifies suffering, why should it be dreaded? We shouldn't dread emptiness, but rather we should feel a kind of joy at it, a fortune at being able to have encountered these teachings and so forth.
Khi mà chấp thật thì nó có cơ sở, cho nên có cái chấp nghĩa, chấp tôi, cho nên nó có cái nền tảng, có cơ sở. Cho nên mình sợ này, sợ cái kia, cho nên chúng ta
itself autonomously or inherently existent. And so here, by kind of understanding that there is no such entity as this I, that nothing exists in that kind of autonomous inherent way that it appears to us. So if there were some I that existed in the way that it appears to us, then yes, any sort of thing, anything going wrong could cause some kind of fear. But if we are, as it says here, even this, but if there is no such thing as even the self, as that kind of autonomously inherently existent self, then whose fear is that? Who is the one that is experiencing fear? Again, it's not saying there's absolutely no self, but that dependently designated self, it doesn't have, there is not the kind of fear that arises from understanding a self to be like inherently or truly existent. Whose fear? What? There is no such self as it appears to us.
Then, my brothers and sisters, our class is going to stop here for tonight. Tomorrow is Saturday, and on the occasion of Buddha Sakyamuni's birth, enlightenment, and Parinirvana Day, which is Sakadawa, His Holiness Dalai Lama will give a teaching on Geshe Langyi Tangpa's 8 verses of training your mind, and conduct the ceremony of generating Bodhisattva at the main Tibetan temple in Dharamsala, India. So Geshe-ma is going to be translating for His Holiness, so she's going to be able to translate for us. But in the morning, tomorrow morning, we are going to have animal liberation at 10. Usually every month we have animal liberation on the 15th of the full moon day. But this month, because full moon day is also Buddha Sakyamuni's Buddha's birthday, so we cannot do animal liberation on the same day, because we have to do so many things to prepare to celebrate his birthday. So we're going to have animal liberation tomorrow morning at 10. And our last class will be on Sunday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And in the morning, Sunday morning, we will celebrate Buddha Sakya, Buddha's birthday. Kính thưa quý vị, kính thưa quý đạo hữu, ngày mai là thứ Bảy thì Thánh Đức Dalai Lama sẽ ban cho một cái thời pháp về vị 8 bậc kệ truyền hóa tâm của ngài Langri Thangpa. Thì cái ngày Langri Thangpa là ngài Pandita vừa mới nhắc tới trong cái lớp học của chúng ta hồi đầu lớp á. Thì sư cô Nhật Hạnh sẽ thông dịch cho ngài, cho nên là sư cô không có thông dịch được cho chúng ta, cho nên ngày mai chúng ta sẽ không có lớp. Sáng mai thì chúng ta sẽ có lễ buổi phóng sinh vào lúc 10 giờ sáng. Thì thường mình có mình có phóng sinh vào ngày rằm âm lịch mỗi tháng, nhưng mà vì tháng này là Chủ nhật là ngày sinh nhật của Đức Phật Thích Ca Mâu Ni, cho nên chúng ta sẽ ăn mừng ngày lễ của Đức Phật đản sinh, cho nên chúng ta không có làm lễ phóng sinh vào ngày Chủ nhật được, mà thay vào đó chúng ta sẽ làm ngày thứ Bảy, tức là ngày mai. Và cái lớp học cuối cùng của chúng ta là tối Chủ nhật vào 6 giờ đến 8 giờ tối. Yeah, and if any one of you who would like to make offerings to Gen Rinpoche, which is His Eminence Pandita, and our 2 translators, Geshe-ma, Nhat, and Ms.Katrina Brooks, please send your offerings to our Zelle account, which is our phone number, Drepung Loseling Institute of Texas, phone number 832-599-1888. Again, our Zelle account number is 832-599-1888, if you'd like to make offerings to Gen Rinpoche and the 2 translators. And so now let's make short mandala offerings and dedicate our merits. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru for continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Mặt đất này được trang nghiêm với dầu thơm và trải đầy hoa, tô điểm với núi Tu Di, tứ đại bộ châu, mặt trời và mặt trăng. Con tưởng tượng nơi đây là cõi Phật và xin cúng dường. Nguyện tất cả chúng sinh được an hưởng cõi tịnh độ này. Sa di vô kỳ trước sinh mẹ tổ choang, vì văn linh sinh đen gan ba đi, sang nhiên sinh theo hoa y, rèo kinh năng sinh la cho ba sông. Ý đàm guru ata mandala kham niyataya ni. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Nhờ nương công đức các thiện hạnh này, nguyện con sớm thành tựu quả vị của Đức Phật Bổn Sư và dẫn dắt tất cả chúng sinh không chừa sót một ai vào quả vị giác ngộ. Nhờ nương công đức các thiện hạnh này, okay. Lama sange rujune, rujika malipa, deyu salagopasho. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminished, but increase more and more. Nguyện cho ngọc quý tối cao Bồ Đề Tâm, nơi nào chưa phát triển sẽ nảy sinh lớn mạnh, nơi nào đã phát triển sẽ tăng trưởng không giảm mà tăng thêm mãi mãi. Trần chụp sâm châu, nguyện bao châu, mắc chân bà nan, kết chụp chi, kể hoa nam bao. May we dedicate these merits to all other sentient beings, including ourselves and others. May we all complete the Buddha path and attain the Buddhahood. Để chúng sinh đều trở thành Phật đạo. Thank you, Pandita. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Geshe-la. Thank you, Geshe-ma. Thank you, Ms.Katrina books. Have a good evening. Good night. Yes. See you tomorrow. Oh, not tomorrow. Tomorrow morning. Yes. Yes.
Record.